Thought I would take a moment and just explain to you guys how I'm setting up the autopilot to work with Arduino and a software called Mobi Flight Connector. For some of you that may be wondering how you connect hardware up to a flight sim, this is a possible solution you could use. This is called an Arduino board. Get them online for about $10. And if you get a wire kit on top of that, maybe about $16. There's two types of boards. This is called a Mega, and even though it may look complicated, it's extremely easy. The Mega allows you to connect more pins or more wires to it, connectors to it, switches to it. And the switches, basically all it is it's going to send a command. When you push a button, it's basically going to toggle that switch on or off. And what that's going to do is that's going to interface through this simple USB cable that goes into the computer into a software right here called Mobi Flight Connector. And what this allows you to do is basically I'll show you guys real quick so this makes sense to you. I'll go to up here to let me go settings. When you first connect this board, you'll need to install some drivers, and there's an Arduino software that you install to get the driver set up. But once you do that, it'll appear here in the list in the settings, and then you can right click on it and you can add a device. And adding a device will allow you to set up an LED or a button, and in this case let's just say button. Then you can assign which pin number you want that button to be. Okay, so that corresponds with these little numbers that are on the board. And so if the button number was, let's just say for this example, button number 53 or pin number 53, you're going to call this button, you could call it nav, for instance. And I'll just type in NAV here. And then when you hit OK, it's going to know that when that button is pushed, I'm just going to hit OK. I'll hit cancel on this, but what it'll do is when that button is pushed, it's going to know that when nav is pushed, that nav wire is connected in to pin number 53. And now that it's communicating with that, now we need to assign that to one of the nav buttons in the software, right? So at that point in time, I would come down here and I would double click here, and this is called inputs. There's two tabs here, an input tab and an output. The input would tell it to take that pin number 53 when it's pushed and map it to a flight simulator control. And an output would be like if you want to fire off an LED light or something and have it come back. But for this case, I'll just say input. Sorry this is so blurry, guys. And the first thing I would do is I would type in a description, and I'm just going to type in nav there. And then you would come over here and click this button here. And right here you have, this is going to be which board, Arduino board you're working with. And then this would tell you which button. And remember if I would have saved that, there would have been a button called nav here. Since I already have one called nav, I'll select nav. And then it'll ask you what type of action you want this to be. And there's 4 different ones in here, and I want to explain this. FSUIPC offset, that's where they have already, the programmers in the past and different developers of flight simulators plugins have been using this for years. But what it basically is they have assigned a specific key command or variable to each one of the items in Flight Simulator. So they're already pre-programmed. So if you use this, it'll map it to one of those pre-programmed commands that will fire off that key or that switch. And pretty much it'd be rare to find an FSUIPC offset that doesn't match up with something on the aircraft. Now, some of the developers of aircraft plugins, like Wilco, for instance, like when you buy an aircraft and you install it in Flight Simulator, sometimes when they build the aircrafts, they don't actually match up the same commands that FSUIPC offset uses. And an example of that is I'm right now mapping a CRJ 700, and several items in the autopilot do not work when you map them to the parallel FSUIPC offset command. I'll show you an example of how this works. If I were just to say FSUIPC offset, it would say, which one do you want to use? And I would say, I want to use the nav one hold. And then I would hit use, and it would automatically throw that offset command here. And then you would assign it a value of 1 or 0. And I'll just say 1 there. So every time it's toggled, the computer knows to use that command and send it to the software, and then that would turn on the nav1 hold. That's how simple the FSUIPC offsets are. But the problem is that sometimes, depending on the developer of the aircraft, for instance, in this case, Wilco, the offsets don't work with all of the autopilot commands. So you can't just assign it an offset and go. If you could, it'd be real quick and easy to do. So they have a couple of other options in this software that you can use, okay? And the other options is what's called a key or an event ID. Event ID would pull in all the different IDs associated with Flight Simulator when an event takes place. And you can go through here, and it's similar to FSUIPC, but as you can see, there's just a lot of options in here. And so you could use an event. A lot of times the event ID may not match up with, again, with the developer of the aircraft. So when you're stuck programming and you don't have an option for FSUIPC and it's not working, and the event ID is not working, there's what's called a key here. And this is the answer to that problem. And the key is basically what they call a macro. Now what a macro is it's where you can record a mouse movement on your screen and then assign it to a key command. For instance, if I came to the software and I wanted to push this BC, or I believe that's back course, when you click that, if you want to record that click and then have that recording assigned to, let's say, shift 5 in the keystroke, you could come over here and just type in the key command, shift 5, and it throws up a shift 5 there, and it will assign that key to shift 5. Now, the way that you create a macro inside the software, and that means that every single time that I push BC here, it's gonna run the same thing as if I typed shift 5 on my keyboard, right? And so I push that, it interprets it as if I put a shift 5 on the keyboard, and then over here we need to now assign shift 5 to the flight simulator. Now to do that, you need to have an add-on called FSUIPC. This is an add-on that you buy, and it opens up the software, and there's a command here called key presses. Now when you do this, there's a thing here that says create mouse macro. When you push that, you can name the macro, and I'll just, for the sake of this, type in test. You'll want to name it the aircraft that you're working on. Hit OK, and now the macro's running. Okay, it doesn't look like anything's happening, but it's actually running in the background. You just hit OK, and now what it's going to do is whichever one I push, and for instance, let's just say heading here, it's now recorded that button push. See how this turned green up here? And now it wants you to name that, right? So I'm just gonna put HDG for heading. And then I just hit enter, and now that macro has been assigned. Now I go back to add-ons, FSUIPC, and I go over here to key presses, and now I have to end the recording of that button push. Now once I end it, I need to assign a key to it. And remember we were talking about shift 5 before? Well, now I'm actually gonna go over here and I'm gonna do a drop down here, and I'm gonna select the one that I named. And remember, I named it test, if you remember. Just come over here. There's test heading. And then I hit set, and it's basically will say press a key. I did that backwards, guys. Sorry about that. So I'll just say shift 3 for this example, because I have shift 5 already assigned. You'll see shift 3 appears there. And then you select the name that you named it earlier when we recorded that macro. And we named it test, if you remember. So we're gonna come over here, go find our test. Heading right there. And then you hit OK. Now what that basically means is every single time that you press shift 3, it's going to push that heading command. Now each time that heading command is pushed, it's gonna parallel that same button being pushed in the software. Now what's cool about that is once you've connected it up over here into Mobi Flight Connector, then it's going to interpret that button there. Let's say we assigned it to heading there, right there. Every time that's pushed, it's going to fire off the pin here, which is assigned to this key command, which in this case shift 5, and then that would fire off and be interpreted by the macro over here to fire that off. So all 3 of them connected. I know it looks like it's complicated and a little bit hard to connect, but it's actually very easy once you do your first one. The hard part for me in learning how to do this was finding that the actual aircraft did not have correct FSUIPC commands, so I had to learn how to do macros, and then had to learn how to record the macro and put it in here to map it. And but as far as doing any programming, there's actually no programming required. As many of you guys know, with Arduino, usually what you do is you open up a software and you would just write your code out, right? Well, this software is actually writing your code when you actually put in these inputs. So it's creating that code so you don't actually have to write it. And if I were to go over here, and I'll show you a copy of the code that it writes, is I would come over here, and let me go over here to panel. You can start seeing, oh, that's not it, I'm sorry. Boy, I'm messing this all up. You guys are gonna be like, Aaron, you need to start all over. But anyhow, I was gonna see if I could find the autopilot code. I don't know where it's saved it at. But anyhow, you'll see that when you open up the file here, once you have this, here's an example. Once you have your thing mapped out here with all your controls, you hit File, Save, okay? There it is right there. And then you would save it. This is in my documents, and it's called Autopilot. Let me just open that. You would save that, and this is the code that just wrote for us just by plugging in those variables. So in the old days, I would have to actually hand code all of these commands to tell the software to communicate with the hardware. But in this case, you don't have to do that because Mobi Flight Connector already does that for you. So that's how simple it is with Mobi Flight Connector. Again, I'm running Prepar3d which is a newer version of Flight Simulator, just purchased and acquired by Lockheed, and then future developers are building against this platform. In addition to Flight Simulator, basically the same exact software, just owned by Lockheed now. As for xplane, this Mobi Flight Connector does not work with xplane, I don't believe, but I know that xplane has something kind of similar that they have developed, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but anyhow, let me see if I've actually, I'm just going to look real quick and see if I found it, just in case some of you guys might be looking for it. Let me go into resources, plugins. Yes, it's called ArdSim, and ArdSim. It's a similar thing to Mobi Flight Connector. The issue is I could not get it to run on Windows 10, and but it allows you basically to go to their website, and it creates a code for you for the commands, where this one's actually a software that creates the code. Theirs does it off of their website, and then you take that file and you plug it in, use the plugin ArdSim to associate those commands. So that's something for xplane. This one is for, this add-on is FSUIPC add-on into Prepared, mapped over to Mobi Flight Connector. So if some of you guys have wondered how to build a sim and put the hardware in and set up an Arduino board, this is a very low cost way to do it. I mean, your cost is going to be the cost of your buttons and your switches, and then the board itself, which is about $10 on eBay. The wires are about $6, I think. And then I think FSUIPC was like, I don't know, $15 or something to buy, a one-time cost. And then, you know, as far as Mobi Flight Connector, I believe it's free and they just take donations. Go ahead and donate to them. And then that's it for wiring up your hardware, guys. Hopefully this answered some questions. You can take this video and match it up with other ones on YouTube and try to figure it out like I did. Thanks, appreciate it.